Tonight on Nation to Nation,
We need Greenland.
as U.S. President Donald Trump continues to covet the territory of Greenland, APTN reporter Justin Hardy says the people of Nunavut sympathize with Greenlanders.
I think that's what a lot of people are putting most of the focus on, is the sovereignty of Greenlanders towards the land.
Parliament returns next week, and Pam Palmater says the Prime Minister needs to put his money where his mouth is to improve his relationship with First Nations.
Promising meetings, promising talk, that doesn't actually do anything.
ICE is harassing legitimate U.S. citizens in major cities, and a veteran journalist says this includes Native Americans.
ICE continues to maintain that these are not race-based stops. Clearly, they're going after dark people, and Native Americans are being swept up in that.
Welcome to Nation to Nation. I'm Fraser Needham. In recent weeks, U.S. President Donald Trump's threat to annex Greenland has dominated the headlines. Things came to a head this week in Davos, Switzerland at the World Economic Forum, where Trump repeated the threat. Greenland is a semi-autonomous part of Denmark, which is part of NATO. People of Nunavut share a strong affinity with Greenland. Both territories are northern, remote, and made up of small populations, the majority of which are Inuit. APTN's Justin Hardy is located in Iqaluit, Nunavut, and he joins me today to talk about the evolving situation. Oh, welcome to Nation, Justin.
Oh, thanks for having me.
No doubt the situation in Greenland is dominating discussion in Iqaluit. Can you tell me some of the ways that people are, or things are doing about the situation in Greenland?
I mean, there is a lot of worry about our neighbors that are just across the Davis Strait. There's a lot of ties between Nunavut and Greenland, both through government partnerships and familial ties, and a lot of the population here are actually people from Greenland, including people like one of the representatives. The representative from Cambridge Bay is Fred Peterson. He was born in Greenland. So a lot of the situation is hitting pretty close to home for people, and there's a lot of worry for family and friends that are living just across the water.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that there are people that are from Greenland or vice versa that live in Nunavut. Were you able to find out a little more about how they you say is it close familiar ties, or is it just people the similar territories, or how does it come about that there are so many people that are maybe originating from Greenland that have ended up in Nunavut?
It has a lot to do with just how close the two territories are. We even share a land border on Hans Island. A lot of people, especially Inuit people, have either parents or siblings that still live in Greenland. They came over for whatever reason, or other family members have gone over just because it's still a new place for a lot of people, but it's still very culturally familiar.
Right, and I know you mentioned when you talked briefly too that there's been a couple things have happened. One was a fairly big march this past weekend, I think, that you covered, and also it's come up in the legislature. Did you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, there was the march this past weekend, which was organized by locals here in Iqaluit. The lead organizer is actually someone from Greenland, so she had a lot of passion for this, and I think it really showed when the community came out to support. A lot of people really want to support their neighbors, whether or not they do have these direct ties with them.
Obviously, lots of international media, including we have two APTN staff members, a reporter and VJ, are over there right now, and there's different takes, I guess, on what's happening. What have you got sort of back from the people in Nunavut? Do they see this sort of, kind of colonial powers, I guess, battling it out over, this territory? Because not a lot about the people of the territory is getting talked about, or do they support sort of the NATO stance, or what do they say about Trump, or what have you been hearing?
They definitely view the U.S. and the U.S. President Trump as just another colonial power trying to take control of Greenland, but the slogan for the march, both here in Iqaluit and the larger movement in Greenland, is Kalalit Nunat, Kalalit Pegat, which means Greenland is for Greenlanders. And I think that's what a lot of people are putting most of the focus on, is the sovereignty of Greenlanders towards the land.
Now, it's put, of course, our prime minister and government in a difficult position. Of course, we're so close to the States. We have, trade relations. We've been trying to mend those with not very much success. The Carney has been criticized a bit for not really saying much in terms of, the elbows up and all that since being reelected. He's taken a very diplomatic stance to Trump. With all this changing, and he did sort of make a bit of a stronger speech in Davos. But do people think that Canada is standing up enough to the United States in terms of defending Greenland?
There are definitely people who want to see more visible support. A lot of allies sent either military ships to the waters surrounding Greenland to sort of, I guess, show that they will be standing with them. I think people want to see something more physical rather than speeches.
Yeah, and just to move that back for a second to Nunavut, because it's in the same situation, really. It's kind of an isolated territory, not particularly well defended, I guess, in terms of our government, and also a lot of security and infrastructure issues. Has that come up that people really want to? Now, Canada has promised some things, but of course hasn't started yet. Have people really been talking that they want to see their interests protected in a stronger infrastructure and security measures, perhaps, by Canada?
There's a little bit on both sides of the argument. There are some people that are a little wary of seeing more military action throughout the territory, but there are some who are, very concerned that Nunavut could be the next in the lines of sights for the U.S. Premier John Main, when we spoke to him last week, he said that Nunavut needs to be a part of any discussion regarding Arctic security. He says that the people that live here have a very good understanding of what they need to feel safer in their homes. So he said it would be unacceptable to exclude Nunavut and the people that live here from any table where that's being discussed.
Of course, we've covered that there is, amidst all this, a strong independence movement in Greenland that wants to gain more autonomy from Denmark. Have people said much in Nunavut? It's the same thing. I mean, it's moved as an autonomous territory with Canada. Has there been much talk about maybe what the people of Nunavut could offer the people of Greenland in that way?
Yes, well, all of the discussions and following along with the slogan being expressed in Greenland is that Greenland belongs to Greenlanders. And that slogan is being carried by both the people who are at the march, as well as the territorial government when they raised Greenland's flag the other day. John Main, when he was speaking on the issue, he said that Nunavut will offer any sort of support that it can offer, but it will be taking Greenland leadership. It will be taking Greenland leadership's lead on what the best way that they could support them would be.
Okay, well, fair enough. And we'll have to end it there for time purposes. But thanks very much again for joining us today, Justin, and keep up the great work in Iqaluit.
All right, thank you so much for having me.
After the break, we'll talk to Toronto Metropolitan University Professor Pam Palmater about the upcoming session of Parliament and how Indigenous issues may play out. Welcome back. MPs return to Parliament next week in what promises to be a busy spring session. The Carney government is once again committed to introducing a First Nations Clean Water Act and tabling another piece of legislation that aims to increase those eligible to gain status under the Indian Act. It has already passed through the Senate and will be introduced in the House of Commons. And of course, the mercurial unpredictability of President Donald Trump is sure to make things interesting in this country. Joining me today to talk about what we expect on the Indigenous front in the upcoming session is Toronto Metropolitan University Professor Pam Palmater. She joins me from Toronto. So welcome back to Nation and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
All right, well, let's first talk with, or I want to talk about the proposed changes to the registration under the Indian Act, or S2. I know you've been following this pretty closely, so I guess maybe you could explain for us What did the government originally propose when they forwarded the bill or the bill forward in the Senate? And what are the amendments? And do you think it will now pass through the House of Commons?
Well, what the government originally proposed was to respond in a very, very limited way to the Nicholas class action about people who were enfranchised historically, making sure that they can regain their status, a few other changes around language, and making sure that women who married other First Nations men who were forcibly transferred to their bands could transfer back. But all of the courts in which the federal government has been losing, whether it's the Lovelace case, McIver case, Deschanel, like all of them continue to say, stop doing piecemeal amendments. You need to get rid of all of the sex discrimination and race discrimination once and for all. But they didn't do that. So all of the witnesses, like the vast majority, it was near unanimous, representing First Nations all over the country, had said, okay, Senate, you're the one that the government introduced this bill in. You need to make amendments so that we get rid of this sex discrimination. And after many, many weeks of testimony and hearing also from the minister several times, one in a very heated exchange, they voted unanimously to amend the Indian Act so that there's no more sex discrimination and there's no more extinction date for First Nations. So there's no more disappearing Indian formula. As long as you have a parent who's a Native person, they can be registered.
Right, and so there was this thing of the second generation cutoff. The government was very much against these amendments. I'm sure you watched with the minister, and it seems this would open it up to, of course, more people, things like that. It costs more money for the government, more services. Do you think it'll pass the House of Commons? Because it's really not what the government originally was proposing.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. It's very rare for the Senate to be unanimous in this kind of thing. And they sent very strong messages, even though the minister called them racist for wanting to support what First Nations, in fact, were asking for, what the Assembly of First Nations passed a resolution for. I mean, all across the country, they have been saying, no, we'll delete it. We'll delete it. We'll delete it. But if they do that, senators have already warned them. Well, it still has to come back to the Senate if you do that, and we're just going to put it back in. They did this one time before with Bill S3, getting rid of some of the sex discrimination provisions, and the federal government said, no, we're not going to do it. And the Senate kept saying, no, we're putting it back in until the federal government came to the table and made the amendments they were supposed to. So I suspect this is probably going to be another battle like previously.
Okay, as I'm sure you followed, the new Prime Minister, Carney, has had a bit of a rocky start with First Nations. The Bill C5, of course, was not popular the way it was put out, and also you have this MOU that they signed with Alberta to put a pipeline to the coast, or proposed, and they didn't consult any First Nations on that, including the ones that are on the coast. Now, he has committed to including First Nations in First Ministers meetings. What do you think maybe the Prime Minister needs to do now to maybe sort of reset this relationship a bit?
Well, I think just that, reset this relationship. Promising meetings, promising talk, that doesn't actually do anything. What is key here is protection for our constitutionally, internationally protected rights. Aboriginal rights, treaty rights, land rights, and our right to free, prior, and informed consent. Because you cannot pass a bill like C5 that doesn't guarantee free, prior, and informed consent when you've already passed C15, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which guarantees free, prior, and informed consent, as do many Supreme Court of Canada cases when Aboriginal title is involved. So there's so many mixed messages that First Nations are rightfully concerned. We've never been able to trust government, and we shouldn't. If you're protecting the rights of future generations, you shouldn't trust anybody. You should make sure those rights are protected. So he does need to take a step back, and the deal that he made with Alberta was just, that was shocking to imagine that those two could make a decision over what's going to happen in First Nation territories in BC without talking to BC, because the premier was upset, or the impacted First Nations. And that's the key here. it's impacted First Nations, not whether First Nations in another territory agree. So he's got to really rethink this legal and political relationship with First Nations, because he got an earful from the chiefs at the AFN Assembly and resolutions were passed. And you have the minister on this Indian status legislation saying, oh, we can't do anything without consultation. And the first question First Nations asked her were, well, where were you on C5? You didn't consult us on C5. So they can't pick and choose. They have to respect our rights always.
Yeah, certainly some work to do there, and maybe a key learning thing for the government is consult first before you sign a deal rather than after. It doesn't work as well if you do it after you've already signed a deal. But anyhow, I'll have to end it there for time purposes. But once again, as always, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks so much.
After the break, we'll talk to veteran U.S. journalist Mark Trahant about how ICE and the agency's current sweeps in American cities like Minneapolis is affecting Native Americans. Welcome back. In recent weeks, the American Immigration Customs Enforcement Agency, better known as ICE, has continued to aggressively step up its sweeps in American cities such as Minneapolis, looking for alleged illegal immigrants. These sweeps are often bringing ICE officers into violent conflict with legitimate American citizens. Native Americans are not immune from the sweeps, so they're sometimes misidentified as illegal Hispanic immigrants. Joining me today to talk about the situation is veteran Native American journalist Mark Trahant. Joins me from Phoenix, Arizona. So welcome back to Nation, Mark, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Thank you, Fraser.
So I guess I've read a few reports on that, but can you tell our viewers how these sweeps are affecting Native Americans?
Yeah, and it really started shortly after the ICE step up. So after Kristi Noem took office, so really about the last year. And at first it was just rumors that Native Americans needed to carry IDs and that people were being identified. And early on, a year ago, there were some stops where ICE would probe basically tribal members and say, are you a citizen, and get the correct answer. In the last couple of weeks, it's really become really unfortunate. In Minneapolis, several tribal citizens from a couple different nations were detained, one for 4 hours, one for a couple of days. Just this last week, a young man, Peter Yazzie from the Navajo Nation, was detained by ICE. Where I'm from, Fort Hall, Idaho, in Idaho Falls, a couple tribal citizens from Shoshone-Bannock were picked up. And so the whole tenor has changed in that ICE doesn't believe tribal documents. They're not, and in fact, Peter Yazzie, the Navajo man, was carrying his tribal ID at the time and his birth certificate and his certificate of Indian blood. I mean, he had basically all the documents you would need, and ICE just didn't believe him. And he had to go through detention, cause his job to have sorts of problems. And it really is becoming an issue because even though ICE continues to maintain that these are not race-based stops, clearly they're going after dark people, and Native Americans are being swept up in that.
Now, the Trump administration, of course, is known for seeking retribution, I guess, against those that see standing in its way of its agenda, whatever that may be at a particular time. How do you see Native American people organizations reacting to these sweeps? Do you think that they will react and assert their rights, or maybe try to stay out of the way of potential violent conflict because the government seems to have no problem with that?
Tribes have actually been pretty clear, do not come onto tribal lands. And one of the statements from the Ho-Chunk tribe in Wisconsin was adamant that within these boundaries, ICE has no jurisdiction and they're not allowed. And it's interesting because much of the federal criminal justice law stems from what's called the Major Crimes Act, which was passed in the 19th century. And no one even thought of immigration as part of that. So none of those crimes are in the Major Crimes Act. And so tribes have exclusive jurisdiction when it comes to this type of act, and can tell us to go. There's also in a lot of treaties exclusion orders. so they could tell an ICE agent you're excluded from the reservation based on treaty rights. Of course, the problem with all of that is the Trump administration is not really high on any treaties, whether it be tribal treaties or international ones right now. They do what they want, irrespective. In fact, one of the things that's just so unfortunate with the ICE step up, and it's true for both tribal citizens and citizens in general, is that it's basically taking a constitutional right away from people. The Fourth Amendment says you don't have to produce papers, you don't have to do anything like that. And ICE is basically ignoring all of those constitutional rights and just acting the way they want to.
How about you mentioned sort of on the reservations? What about in the cities though, where a lot of these sweeps are taking place?
Yeah, in fact, this morning, the police chief for Brooklyn Park, which is a suburb of Minneapolis, came on and said that they're hearing from many tribal or citizens, including tribal, who are being stopped by ICE for no reason other than how they look. And so it's becoming more common, and other police agencies are starting to say, you're just going too far with all of this.
Right. Yeah. So, and I guess as a general question, like these demonstrations have been, for the most part, what we've seen here, pretty peaceful. But if they continue to be aggressive and you know, in cities like Minneapolis, do you see that changing potentially?
Well, I mean, most of the aggressiveness has been on the part of the feds. There was a wonderful sign posted on social media this morning from a school that we never imagined having to protect our children from the federal government. And that aggressiveness, and you see it in just different ways, whether it's the weaponry, the masks on the agents, that sort of thing. So the protesters, for the most part, have been peaceful. There was one counter protester who wandered into Minneapolis, and he was quickly moved away by protesters. But other than that, it's been largely peaceful.
Yeah, I guess I was asking from the other end of but if the officers continue to push people like they have been, do you see that potentially changing?
Well, yeah, I mean, to go all big sky on you, I think you look at what kind of sparks can start a civil war, and this is the kind of thing that could do that, where that deeply entrenched ideas that are so far apart, and something going awry. I mean, the shooting of Renee Good certainly was in that vein, but imagine that on a scale a little larger, and it could be an outright revolt.
Yeah, certainly lots to talk about it. We've kind of been watching up here, sort of almost I don't say in horror, but with very wide eyes, I guess,
Right.
to say anything, because it really is nothing seen like this maybe since really the Vietnam War kind of riots that were, you know, sort of back in the 60s and that. But anyhow, we'll have to unfortunately end it there. But thanks very much again for joining us today, Mark.
Happy to do it.
That concludes this week's episode of Nation to Nation. If you missed any part of tonight's show, you can check out our podcast at aptnnews.ca/podcast. Karen Pugliese will be back next week. I'm Fraser Needham. Good night.